the Egyptian desert around 4,000 years before Christ. Amidst the vast expanse of golden sand, under a sun that hung like a giant flame in the sky, colossal shapes gradually emerged. The pyramids. These magnificent structures were not merely resting places for the pharaohs, but also symbols of supreme power, representing the belief that the king was the incarnation of the gods on earth. During that era, Egypt was one of the most glorious civilizations. The gentle Nile River brought life, while a powerful army protected its territory and expanded its borders. The rolling war chariots and the ranked formations of archers painted a picture of a nation both prosperous and ambitious. And at the pinnacle of power was the pharaoh, the son of Ra, the king who held the destiny of millions of subjects in his hands. But let's imagine, amidst this ancient scene, next to the wooden war chariots, a giant machine of steel suddenly appears. Covered in moss-green camouflage, weighing tens of tons, a modern tank. The roar of its engine echoes through the desert, its iron tracks crushing the sand and rock beneath, its cannon barrel extending like a steel dragon ready to breathe fire. The question arises, what would happen if a pharaoh truly possessed a tank? This is not just a strange hypothesis, but a test of imagination about the intersection of two worlds separated by millennia. On one side is a mystical ancient civilization, relying on human strength and religious faith for its existence. On the other is the symbol of modern industrial warfare, where machines and firepower determine victory and defeat. If a pharaoh had a tank, would Egypt become an invincible empire, conquering the entire Middle East and the Mediterranean? Or would this machine, out of its time, plunge ancient society into chaos as no one could comprehend its origin or operation? Let's place ourselves in that context. 1279 BC, the era of Ramesses II, one of the greatest pharaohs. He was hailed as a great warrior, famed for the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites. In reality, Ramesses II had to rely on thousands of chariots and archers to maintain a precarious balance. But in this hypothetical scenario, if he had a tank in his hands, the balance of power might have tilted entirely in one direction. Remember, in those times, the most formidable weapon was the war chariot, a wooden vehicle pulled by horses, agile but fragile against a steel cannon. A tank could crush dozens of chariots in an instant. A single shot from its main gun would be enough to obliterate an enemy formation. In the eyes of ancient soldiers, it would be nothing less than a weapon of the gods descended to earth. However, a tank is not just a weapon, it is also a symbol. If it appeared in ancient Egypt, it would not be seen merely as a war machine, but could be considered a sacred artifact, a miracle, or the embodiment of a war god. The people would revere the pharaoh even more, believing he was truly granted immortal power by the gods. From here, a door of imagination opens. Would the tank participate in conquests? Or would it become a sacred object hidden within a pyramid? And most importantly, if this power that transcends time truly existed, which path would human history have taken? To understand the power and influence of a tank in the context of ancient Egypt, we must look back at the social foundations and key figures of that period. A war machine, no matter how powerful, only truly has meaning when placed in the hands of people with ambition and authority. And in the world of Egypt, none other than the pharaoh embodied all of this. The pharaoh, a living god on earth. In the ancient Egyptian consciousness, the pharaoh was not just a king but an incarnation of the divine. The people believed the pharaoh was granted the right to rule by the gods Ru, Horus, or Osiris. He was a political leader, the commander-in-chief of the army, and the high priest in religious ceremonies. Every word, every decision of the pharaoh was considered divine will. Take Ramesses II, for example, the longest reigning monarch in ancient Egyptian history, 66 years. He was renowned as a proud warrior who often led his troops into battle himself. In the Battle of Kadesh, although the Egyptian army was in a perilous situation, Ramesses was depicted as having single-handedly fought against thousands of enemies, becoming a symbol of royal power. If a figure like Ramesses II had a tank, his power would be elevated to an unimaginable level. It would no longer be the image of a king riding a chariot drawing a bow on the battlefield, but the image of a true god of war sitting inside a roaring steel behemoth, making the entire battlefield tremble. The Egyptian army, the pride of the desert. The army was the pillar that made Egypt a regional power. The main weapons of that time included long spears, bows and arrows, leather-covered wooden shields, and especially the war chariot, a two-wheeled vehicle pulled by horses, considered the high-tech weapon of its time. A chariot could carry two people, one to drive the horses and another to shoot arrows or throw javelins. The mobility of the chariots allowed the Egyptian army to launch swift, powerful attacks, breaking enemy formations. But chariots were also fragile. Wooden wheels could easily break, horses could tire, and their entire strength depended on human skill. Imagine a steel-armored tank appearing amidst thousands of wooden chariots. Sharp arrows and gleaming spearheads would become meaningless upon impact with its tens of millimeters of steel armor. The thundering engine, the tracks crushing every obstacle, the 75 millimeters or 88 millimeters cannon, if we choose a modern tank model like a Panzer or Tiger, would only need a few volleys to turn the battlefield into a sea of fire. In the eyes of Egyptian soldiers, it would be nothing short of a divine beast sent by the gods to protect the pharaoh. And in the eyes of the enemy, it would be the end of all resistance. The people and daily life beyond the magnificent palaces and great monuments. Egypt was also a land of hard-working people. They toiled daily along the Nile or worked on massive construction sites. To them, the pharaoh was a protective shade, but also a heavy shadow on their shoulders, as everyone had to serve the great endeavors of the court. In the minds of farmers, craftsmen, and slaves, seeing a tank would certainly be beyond their comprehension. They might believe it was a miracle, a gift from the gods, or perhaps an iron monster spreading terror. And that very fear would further consolidate the pharaoh's power, the only one capable of controlling this monster. Religion and divine symbols. It is crucial to remember, everything in Egypt was connected to religion. From architecture and rituals to warfare, all carried spiritual significance. A tank, in that context, would undoubtedly be given a divine name, perhaps the son of Ra or the beast of Seth, the god of war and chaos. If the pharaoh declared the tank a gift from the gods, no one would dare to doubt it. On the contrary, it would become the ultimate symbol of power, proof that the pharaoh was not just a king, but a living god. With all these foundations, a king who craved immortality, a powerful army, a society that worshipped deities, the tank would not just be a weapon, but a tool to change the very course of history. And the climax would come when it was first brought onto the battlefield. The historical climax or turning point. The Syrian desert, 1274 BC. The blazing red sun hung high like a giant torch, heating every scorching grain of sand. A tense atmosphere enveloped the city of Kadesh, where the two most powerful empires of the East were preparing for a decisive battle. The Egypt of Ramesses II and the Hittite Empire of Muwatalli II. From the east, the Egyptian army stretched like a giant serpent across the sand. Thousands of infantrymen held their spears high, their bronze shields layered like steel scales. Hundreds of wooden war chariots stood tall, horses neighing, their gleaming spearheads reflecting the blinding sun. The rhythm of the war drums beat against the soldiers' chests, making them tremble, whether from fear or excitement. It was hard to tell. To the west, dust rose high, obscuring the horizon. The Hittite army approached like a sandstorm. thousands of chariots with hooves thundering like rolling thunder, tens of thousands of cavalry and infantry stretching endlessly. They outnumbered the Egyptians too, even 3-1. The long blast of bronze horns and the roar of their war cries filled the air. The smell of metal, sweat, and the imagined scent of blood made the atmosphere more suffocating than the desert heat. Between these two seas of humanity, a secret was still hidden within the Pharaoh's encampment. The moment of revelation, the divine weapon of Ra. In a large tent covered with white linen, under a taut canvas shielding it from the sun, lay an object that had never appeared on any battlefield of mankind. It was not a wooden chariot nor a giant war elephant, but a cold, heavy mass of steel standing like a black stone in the golden desert. It was a tank, a monster from the future lost in the ancient world. Royal guards and high-ranking generals surrounded it, all whispering in amazement. They called it by many names: the Bronze Beast, the Chariot of Ra, the Iron Monster, but absolutely no one dared to touch it, as if fearing punishment from the gods. Ramesses II entered. He wore gleaming golden armor, his head adorned with a royal war helmet. His eyes were proud, the corners of his lips curled into a slight smile that blended both arrogance and destiny. He placed his hand on the cold steel, whispering softly as if in prayer. Today Ra does not just watch over me ... He will fight with me. He gave a signal. Soldiers pulled away the covering cloth. And then a deep guttural roar erupted. The engine started, a strange sound one no one had ever heard. It was not the sound of hooves, not the beat of war drums. It was like thunder trapped in the bowels of the earth, rumbling, shaking the very sand. Horses neighed wildly, many breaking their tethers and bolting into the open. The Egyptian soldiers stared, a mixture of horror and awe on their faces. In the distance, the Hittite army was also stunned, seeing a colossal iron vehicle slowly moving into the light. Its tracks crushed sand and rock, leaving deep, winding trails. The sun reflected off its black steel, making it look like a moving statue of a god. The tank entered the battlefield. The moment of history began. The first shot, thunder rips the sky. The Hittite chariot division charged like a tidal wave. Hundreds of wooden chariots pulled by the strongest horses, wheels spinning, dust clouding the air. The charioteers shouted, drawing their bows, their spears glinting. They believed that a concentrated assault would crush the Egyptian army once again, as it had in so many battles before. But this time, they faced something that did not belong to their world. The tank stopped, its turret slowly turning. The long black cannon aimed directly at the Hittite vanguard. For a split second, the entire battlefield seemed to hold its breath, and then the first explosion roared. A plume of white smoke shot from the cannon's barrel. A shell flew forth, faster than any arrow, more powerful than any spear. It whistled, tearing through the wind, and in the blink of an eye, boom! The lead chariot was hit. The entire vehicle exploded into splinters. The horses were torn apart, soldiers thrown from the cart, blood and fire mixing together. The explosion struck the hearts of men, making the entire battlefield shake as if from an earthquake. Before they could recover, the second shot rang out. This time, a group of 3 chariots simultaneously erupted into a sea of fire. Burning pieces of wood flew into the sky, raining down like fiery hail. The mangled horses neighed in despair before collapsing in the desert. Black smoke billowed high, the acrid smell of burning spreading across the space. The Hittite army panicked, their war cries turning into screams of terror. The monster of Seth! The gods are punishing us! Some chariots turned and fled. Others, out of pride or orders, still tried to charge forward, but it was useless. Every arrow and spear that struck the tank's hull only made a cold clang, bouncing off, no different from children throwing stones at a cliff face. The chain reaction, fear spreads. The Egyptian army was invigorated as if by divine intervention. They had never witnessed a weapon that could crush the enemy so easily. Chants of Ramesses, son of Ra, rose up, spreading throughout their ranks. The archers drew their bows in unison, raining down arrows for cover. The infantry roared, charging after the iron monster. The tank was now not just a machine, but a banner of faith, a symbol of invincible power. Meanwhile, on the Hittite front line, terrified commanders ordered their troops to encircle the monster. But before they could stabilize their formation, another volley of cannon fire wiped out their entire left flank. Dozens of chariots exploded, flames burning bright red. Smoke, fire, explosions, all merged, turning the battlefield into a true hell. Charging into a sea of men, the engine roared like a bloodthirsty iron beast. The tank accelerated, its tracks tearing through the yellow sand, charging straight into the heart of the Hittite formation. The flimsy wooden chariots were like toys before the giant steel tracks. One was crushed in an instant, its wooden frame splintering, wheels flying off. Soldiers flattened with only time for a single scream before silence. Blood sprayed out, staining the sand red. Hittite cavalrymen yelled, throwing their javelins at the iron monster. But all they heard was a hopeless clang. Some horses panicked, neighing, throwing their riders to the ground and scattering in chaos. Many Hittite soldiers were trampled to death by their own horses before they could even fight. From the turret, the machine gun fired crisply. A hail of bullets tore through the air, cutting through rows of soldiers. The rhythmic rat-tat-tat sounded out, and with each beat, dozens of lives fell. Blood splattered, mixing with the dust and sand to form a thick red mud. The Egyptian soldiers behind them roared in triumph. They saw their great enemy being crushed like weeds. Their spirits soared. They were certain that Rhea himself had descended. The suffocating steel compartment. While fire and blood raged outside, inside the tank was another world, a living metal furnace. Dim light from the viewing slits reflected on the tense faces of the three-man crew, the driver, the gunner, and the loader. They were drenched in sweat, the backs of their shirts soaked, their breathing heavy. The deafening roar of the engine vibrated in their ears, the harsh clang of metal on metal, the smell of oil and gunpowder, all combined to make the space thick and difficult to breathe. "Target left, 30 degrees, shouted the gunner. "Loading!" The loader strained, lifting a heavy shell and ramming it into the breach. "Fire!" An explosion deafened them, the compartment shaking violently. The tank spat out another deadly fireball. Outside, another cluster of Hittite chariots vanished in a cloud of smoke, but there was no time to rest. The clang of metal rang out. The enemy was throwing spears, axes, even rocks against the hull. The entire steel compartment shuddered as if it would break apart. There on the roof, one of the crew yelled. Indeed, through the narrow viewing slit, they could see figures leaping on top, carrying burning, tar-soaked rags. The enemy was trying to shove fire into the ventilation shafts. The air was as taut as a bowstring. The ring of fire. The Hittites had found a new tactic. Use their numbers to surround it. They couldn't penetrate the steel, but they had thousands of men. From all four sides, cavalry and infantry swarmed like black ants surrounding a beast. Dozens of burning torches were thrown, and flames erupted around the armor. Thick black smoke rose, the acrid smell of burning tar seeping through the gaps. A group of chariots charged at full speed, ramming into the tank's side as if to topple it. The impact was violent, and the giant vehicle swayed. Inside the compartment, the three men were thrown about, their heads hitting the metal, drawing blood. "We're stuck! The track is stuck!" The driver screamed. The tank had slid into a soft sandpit, its tracks spinning furiously but unable to get out. This was the Hittites' only chance. A sky-shattering roar went up. They surged forward, spears and swords clanging against the hull, torches shoved into every opening. Smoke poured into the compartment, making the three-man crew choke and cough, their eyes stinging. From a distance, Ramesses II saw this. He gritted his teeth, his heart tightening. If the divine weapon failed before thousands of his troops, their faith would shatter and he would lose everything. A breathtaking moment. Inside the steel compartment, the air was so suffocating it felt like breathing had stopped. The driver floored the accelerator, the engine roaring like a wounded animal. The track spun wildly, kicking up sand, but still, it couldn't break free. The gunner swiveled the turret, aiming at a group of soldiers climbing aboard. One shot. The entire group of men and horses exploded, bits of burnt flesh splattering against the armor and falling like red rain. But immediately, another group charged, even more frenzied. Can't take it anymore. The loader coughed, his eyes bloodshot. In that moment of desperation, the tank suddenly shuddered. A track gripped hard, the engine screamed to its peak, and then, crunch! It lurched out of the sandpit like a beast breaking its chains. The entire encirclement was thrown back. Dozens of soldiers fell, crushed under the tracks. Others, who had just been cheering what they thought was a victory, now screamed in horror as they saw the monster return. The fierce counterattack. Freed from the trap, the tank immediately swiveled its turret. It fired shot after shot, each one a blooming sea of fire. The Hittite wing that had just surrounded it disintegrated in black smoke and red blood. The machine guns swept and swept and swept. Long lines of soldiers fell like harvested grain. Screams, cries, and shrieks mixed into a horrifying symphony of death. But the Hittites did not stop. Their commander screamed, ordering the archers to fire volleys from a distance, hoping to find a gap. Thousands of arrows, dark as a sandstorm, rained down. A few lodged in the viewing slits, causing another moment of panic for the crew. However, the steel hull held firm. The few scratches were nothing compared to the storm this monster was creating. The aftermath of fire and blood. As the sun began to set in the west, the battlefield of Kadesh was stained red with blood and fire. Thousands of corpses of horses, burnt-out chariots, and soldiers lay scattered like broken dolls. The tank stood tall amidst the sea of smoke. It was no longer a machine, but an iron nightmare, a weapon beyond imagination that had unleashed hell on this very earth. But the battle was not over. The Hittites, in their desperation, prepared for one final counterattack, a death charge, gathering hundreds of chariots, mustering all their strength to bring down the monster. Ramesses II stood on his golden chariot, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He knew the decisive moment had come. Mustering all strength, the Hittites prepared the final blow. The sunset at Kadesh was not its usual gentle gold, but a deep crimson, the red of blood, the red of fire, the red of unending cries. On the distant plateau, hundreds of Hittite chariots gathered. Wooden wheels creaked, horses neighed in exhaustion but were still whipped relentlessly. The Hittite commanders screamed themselves hoarse, encouraging their soldiers in a fit of desperation. If we don't bring it down, we will all die. The Lord of Hattusa commands, kill it or die trying. Their shouts merged into a roaring sea of sound. Spears were raised high, swords gleamed, and eyes were bloodshot with hatred. They knew they were facing not just the Egyptian army, but a machine from the realm of the gods. But for that very reason, if they could destroy it, their fame would be written into the annals of history, their names immortalized. The entire wing moved like a surging black storm, gathering all its strength for one final battle. Inside the steel compartment, exhaustion. Inside the tank, the three-man crew was also at the end of their rope. The loader's hands trembled, covered in blisters from lifting shell after heavy shell. The gunner's eyes were bloodshot, his eyelids drooping, but he still forced himself to keep the sight steady. The driver's chest heaved, his breaths ragged, sweat dripping onto the hot control panel. Ramesses II stood behind them, one hand on the cold steel wall, his eyes fixed on the small viewing slit. He was no longer the arrogant pharaoh on his throne, but a true warrior, a comrade to these soldiers inside his iron stomach. "You have come this far with me," he said, his voice hoarse but firm, "and from here we will carve our names into eternity. Not with a throne, but with thunder and steel fire." The compartment fell silent, but a final spark ignited in the eyes of the three soldiers. They understood. It was either victory or they would be annihilated in this sea of blood. The collision of two worlds. The Hittite wing charged down the slope like a raging waterfall. The thunder of hooves shook the earth, and their war cries were like rolling thunder. Hundreds of chariots descended at once, a forest of bristling spears, like a giant swarm of insects intent on devouring the lone iron beast. The tank roared. Its engine howled like a wild animal. The cannon swiveled and fired. Boom! A fireball exploded amidst the sea of men and horses, throwing a dozen chariots into the air, turning them into charred debris. But the rest of the army kept coming. The machine gun roared, its bullets tearing through the air. Horses fell in heaps, soldiers were thrown from their chariots, blood splattering everywhere. Yet, as one rank fell, another surged forward to take its place. The entire battlefield shuddered under the force of two opposing powers, the unseen industrial might of the future and the desperate will of thousands of ancient soldiers. The moment the tank almost fell, an enormous crash echoed across the field. A Hittite chariot had made a suicidal charge, ramming straight into the tank's side. The impact sent a violent tremor through the steel compartment. A dent appeared on the armor, and inside, the crew was thrown about. Flames erupted on the tank's flank. The smell of burning filled the air. "We've been breached," the gunner shouted. Smoke seeped through the cracks, making all four men cough violently. The engine roared, but the grinding sound of metal indicated that one of the tracks was partially jammed. The giant machine slowed, nearly swallowed by the encirclement. Outside, the Hittite soldiers roared in triumph. "Now's the time. Burn it. Smash it." Dozens of torches were shoved into the gaps, and hundreds of spears and swords hammered against the hull. The horrific sound was like a funeral drum. Ramesses II gripped the hilt of his sword, his voice a low growl. "We are not dead. This chariot is the body of a god, and a god never falls." He gave the order. Fire directly into the center of their formation. One decisive shot. The shot of destiny. The gunner staggered, his vision blurred by smoke, but he still managed to aim through the sight. Before him was the dense mass of the Hittite army, their commanders on horseback urging them forward, their cries like a roaring wave. "Load!" The pharaoh's voice thundered. The loader, using his last ounce of strength, lifted the final shell. His hands trembled but did not let go. He rammed it into the breach and collapsed, but still managed to cry out, "It's done!" The gunner pulled the trigger. Boom! A flash of light tore across the sunset. The shell shot out, screaming, and then detonated right in the center of the enemy wing. The light was blinding, and the shockwave threw dozens of chariots into the air, sending soldiers flying like falling leaves. Horses were torn apart, wood splintered, and men were charred black. A massive crater opened in their formation, as if the earth itself had exploded. The roar of battle suddenly turned into a deathly silence. Then, groups of Hittite soldiers began to flee. They no longer believed this was a battle, but a divine punishment. Victory in a sea of smoke. The tank stood its ground, smoke rising from it, its steel body scarred with burns, but it had not fallen. The pharaoh opened the hatch and stepped out, his entire body covered in dust and sweat. The light of the setting sun illuminated him, making him look like a living god emerging from a chariot of fire. The Egyptian army behind him erupted in cheers. They surged forward, wiping out the remnants of the fleeing Hittite army. The Battle of Kadesh, which history would have recorded as a bloody, indecisive conflict, was now etched as an absolute victory thanks to a single tank. Across the battlefield, the bodies of horses, the wreckage of chariots, and the corpses of men lay in heaps. But above all, a new legend was born, the legend of the Pharaoh and the chariot of Re. End of the climax. The smoke gradually cleared, and night descended. Ramesses II looked out over the battlefield, his heart filled with both pride and a faint, vague sense of dread. Was mankind ready to possess a power so far beyond its time? But that was a story for another day. Today he was the victor, and the tank had made him immortal in the memory of thousands of years to come. Consequences and societal reactions. The battle ends, the tremors spread. When the fire and smoke of Kadesh cleared, the battlefield was no longer a place of conflict but a giant cemetery. Thousands of Hittite horses, chariots, and soldiers lay dead. But more terrifying than death was the psychological shadow the tank cast upon the minds of men. For the Egyptian army, it was a new faith that the god Rhea had truly given a weapon to the pharaoh. They whispered among themselves, calling the tank by many names: the chariot of the sun god, the iron beast, or the gatekeeper of the underworld. Rumors spread swiftly from the military camps to the villages along the Nile, becoming the talk of the populace for days. For the Hittites, the fear became a haunting ghost. The surviving soldiers trembled as they recounted their tale. They had not fought man, but an unkillable monster. This news spread all the way to Hattusa, the Hittite capital, where the horrified nobility debated whether Egypt had discovered some form of magic beyond human reason. Reaction of the Egyptian court. In the palace at Memphis, when news of the victory arrived, the court erupted in celebration. The priests of the Temple of Amun immediately declared it proof that Rhea stood with Ramesses II. More statues of the pharaoh were erected, depicting him standing atop the tank, his arm raised like a god casting down lightning. The Egyptian nobility vied to sing his praises. Some saw it as an opportunity to consolidate the pharaoh's power. But there were also whispered concerns. What if such a weapon falls into the hands of another? A question that was never answered. Meanwhile, the common people rejoiced in their own way. They believed this victory would bring many years of prosperous harvests, as the gods had shown their favor. Many families hung protective amulets depicting the iron chariot on their doors, hoping it would ward off evil spirits. Reaction of the Hittites. On the other side, Hattusa was shaken. When King Muwatalli II received the news, his face turned pale. He had committed a powerful army, yet in a matter of hours, it had disintegrated before something never before mentioned in any text. Some of his generals argued it was the magic of the south, requiring sacrifices to the war goddess Ishtar for the power to fight it. Others coldly admitted they were facing a new world where the strength of steel surpassed the courage of men. The Hittite populace was bewildered. In the marketplaces, people whispered, "We fought against gods, not men." Many fearful mothers kept their children indoors when they heard the sound of hooves, haunted by the thought that the iron beast might reappear. The human psyche before a power beyond its time. Both nations, victor and vanquished, experienced the same shock. They had come face to face with a power that did not belong to their era. The Egyptians saw it as a divine blessing. The Hittites saw it as a curse. But on both sides, this obsession was deeply etched into their minds, making people ask for the first time, where does true power come from? From the gods or from the hands of man? Long-term consequences. This hypothetical Battle of Kadesh, if recorded in history, would not only have shifted the balance of power between Egypt and the Hittites, but would also have sown the seeds of a global fear. Egypt would further deify its pharaoh, seeing him as the only one who could control the thunder of Ra. The Hittites would live in a nightmare, wary every time they saw the shadow of the Egyptian army on their borders. And neighboring peoples, upon hearing the news, would either submit in servitude or try to possess the secret of steel for themselves. The tank, which was just a coincidental appearance in the stream of history, suddenly became the center of a new psychological era. Open ending for a sequel. Was this victory truly a good thing for Egypt? Or had it opened a dangerous path where humanity began to crave power far beyond its own capacity?